They locked the doors, but they didn't lock what was inside. It wasn't to keep the patients in. It was to keep something else from getting out. Before we start this macabre story, please like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon. That's the first line scratched into the crumbling wall of Bedlam's west wing, burned into plaster, not carved. The ash around the letters still faintly smells like sulfur. The man who wrote it was found sitting beside it, his own tongue cut out and buried in his palm. He had no tools, no weapon, no visitors, and no tongue. Welcome to Bedlam, not the one from pop culture, not the sanitized Bethlem Royal Hospital spoken about in dusty textbooks. I'm talking about the Bedlam they buried beneath the official histories, the one they sealed with cement and silence, the one built on ancient ground, where something had been whispering long before the walls ever echoed with screams. Bedlam was never just an asylum. It was a feeding ground, and not just for the corrupt doctors, the diseased clergy, or the aristocrats who paid to watch the madness like a circus. No, this place fed something older, something inhuman, something that wanted the screams, needed them, studied them. The asylum's architecture was not accidental. Each hallway, each iron bolt, each patient room was positioned according to a geometric configuration older than the hospital itself. Symmetry mattered. Placement mattered. Because what they were really building wasn't an institution. It was a ritual. And the so-called patients? Most were never insane. Not before they arrived, anyway. Many were inconvenient lovers, bastard children of noblemen, servants who saw too much or those who merely knew the wrong names. They disappeared behind Bedlam's gates, and if they came out, they were something else. Broken, blind, or babbling truths too dark for sane ears. You've been told history's greatest horrors came from war, famine, plague, but Bedlam was something worse. It was horror designed by men who thought they were gods, men who believed madness was a door, and that if you opened it wide enough, you could reach through. You're not ready for what's next, but it's too late. The moment you heard this voice, you stepped into the ward, and they're listening again. You want to know when it began? Not when they opened the asylum, but when they unearthed something they were never supposed to find. In 1247, beneath the foundation of what would become Bedlam, workmen uncovered a stone slab carved in a language older than Latin, older than known history. They showed it to no one, not the clergy, not the crown, just one man, a monk named Alaric, who vanished that same week after muttering one word repeatedly: exonymous, lifeless. But it didn't mean the dead. It meant something that feeds on the living. The slab was buried again, deeper this time, and the blueprints for the hospital were redrawn by an architect who never signed his name. His only instruction: place the lunatics above the mouth. And so they did. For 700 years, Bedlam was more than a hospital. It was a lid. And the patients, the screaming, the sobbing, the howling, that was not madness. That was the sound of something being fed through them. Every night at 3:13, the iron bells rang, even when no one touched the ropes. And always, one patient vanished. No record, no name, no memory. Just gone. The official story? They were released. But then why were they never seen again? Why did the staff start sleeping in shifts, never alone and always with lamps burning? Because they knew. Bedlam was not decaying from age, it was leaking. They called them the night choir, not patients, not staff, not even human by the end. 7 individuals placed in the lowest wing of Bedlam, far below public access, uncharted, unsanctioned, and unsupervised. Officially, they never existed. But they sang, every night at the same hour, in perfect unison. No lyrics, just tones, long, low, harmonic vibrations that made the bones of the building tremble. The guard said they heard it through 10 feet of stone. One claimed his teeth cracked from the frequency. And the song? It wasn't music. It was a summoning, a vibration designed to open something beneath. Records show that each member of the night choir was handpicked from orphanages and debtors' prisons. All had experienced near-death hallucinations. All reported the same recurring dream before arrival, a circular room with a ceiling of eyes and a black shape in the center whispering, "Return to me." By the 3rd month, the singers no longer ate food. Their mouths never moved. The tones came from deep inside them, like some other thing was using their bodies to make sound. One priest who visited them ripped out his own ears with a spoon and wrote in blood, "They aren't singing, they're remembering." And then came the accident, a fire in the lower ward, blamed on faulty oil lamps. But the charred remains didn't match the number of patients. 2 were missing. Some say they walked out through a door that wasn't there the night before. Some say they never left, just changed form. And Bedlam? It was never the same. The song stopped, but the walls started weeping. Bricks bled, clocks reversed, and the doctors who covered it up began to lose their minds, one by one. Whatever the night choir awakened, it was never put back to sleep. What no one dares admit is that Bedlam didn't treat madness, it manufactured it. Madness was the currency, the power source, the raw material they needed for something older than medicine. Take Ward D. The echo room. No furniture, no windows. Just one patient at a time, placed in total silence, until the walls began speaking back. Not with words, but with versions of the patient. Laughter that didn't belong to them, whispers repeating thoughts they hadn't yet spoken. And then came the scratching. Every patient assigned to that room scratched the same symbol into their own skin within 24 hours. A symbol not taught, not known, but identical in every case. A spiral with 7 hooks. When an intern tried to research it, he disappeared. The file was erased, his name deleted from all logs, and even his parents claimed he'd never existed. That was the warning. The higher you climbed in Bedlam's hierarchy, the more you understood. This was not a place of healing. It was a machine, a temple of distortion. The layout was intentional. Patients spiraled through corridors that looped in fractal patterns. Light fixtures cast shadows where there should be none. Staircases led down 1 step more each day, as if the building itself was growing downward. A French architect who visited in 1781 claimed the building was not bound by Euclidean geometry. He called it a dimensional wound. His body was found wedged into a dumbwaiter shaft, folded in a way no skeleton could permit. Cause of death: spatial contradiction. By then, rumors had spread. Certain patients weren't ill, they were offerings, each one chosen to feed something beneath. And the more they screamed, the more the floors seemed to vibrate with contentment. At night, the guards locked each other in, because the real threat didn't come from the patients. It came from the walls. They always denied it, but there was a basement beneath the basement, a level never recorded on any blueprint, never acknowledged by any physician. They called it the Hollow, a nickname whispered only by the oldest orderlies, the ones who'd worked there long enough to see the ground bleed. You had to go through 3 locked gates to reach it, each gate older than the last. The final door? It wasn't made of wood or steel. It was made of bone, fused vertebrae, polished, and inscribed with a language no one dared translate. Only one man ever entered the Hollow and returned. Dr. Percival Ashton, head physician from 1812 to 1819. When he emerged, he was blind in both eyes, though they'd suffered no injury. He kept saying, "I saw the inside of the world, and it saw me." His writings, confiscated by the Crown and buried in the Royal Archives, describe a room shaped like a human brain, pulsating, breathing, alive. He claimed it wasn't a chamber, it was a consciousness. The Hollow was Bedlam's secret heart, and it demanded tribute. Every full moon, an unnamed patient would be walked in. No record, no return. What happened inside was never witnessed, only the aftermath. Seismic tremors, lights exploding, patients across the asylum waking at once screaming the same word, below. Ashton vanished in 1819 along with his wife and 2 children. No trace, no graves, only a single line carved into his office wall. The hollow remembers its debt. And for the next decade, Bedlam pulsed. The building would sweat. Paint would peel in spirals. Visitors reported nausea, vertigo, sometimes amnesia after leaving. One journalist from Prague entered for a profile piece. He returned 3 days later with no fingernails and speaking in reversed Latin. What they built wasn't a hospital, it was a bargaining chamber, an altar. And the deeper you went, the more it didn't feel like descending through earth, but through conscience. They called her Patient 43, but she had no records before her admittance in 1763. No birthplace, no relatives, no known language. She was found wandering the outskirts of London, naked, eyes black as coal, murmuring in tones that didn't match any known dialect, at least not then. Later, experts would analyze recordings of her voice and find something horrifying. Her speech wasn't words. It was mimicry of the building itself. Every groan of timber, every whisper of wind through the cracks, every blood-slicked moan from the lower wards, she echoed it like the asylum was speaking through her. Her cell was locked 24 hours a day. Still, the locks rusted from the inside out. The straw in her bedding twisted into nooses. In her presence, candles flickered counterclockwise, and men felt their lungs tighten, as though their own breath betrayed them. One guard said she aged in reverse, starting old, then getting younger, day by day, until she resembled a child with 1,000-year-old eyes. On her 43rd day, she vanished. Not escaped. Disappeared. Nothing but a pool of water in her bed and claw marks on the ceiling. The next day, the patients began speaking in her voice. All of them. Simultaneously. Even the mute. Even the dead. Doctors panicked. Some tried to exorcise the ward. Others begged to be transferred. But those who'd heard her too long, those who listened, began to change. Not just mentally, physiologically. Fingernails curved like horns, teeth elongated, pupils narrowed. It was as if the building itself was selecting new hosts. One priest later confessed that Patient 43 wasn't a patient at all. She was a message, a herald, something sent before the feast. And her number? 43? Not a designation. A countdown. There was one room they boarded up, not because of what was in it, but because of what it showed. Room 217. It wasn't special at first. A simple observation chamber, stone walls, iron bed, one window with bars. But every patient placed inside developed the same delusion, that they could see themselves outside the room, walking, talking, smiling at staff. These weren't hallucinations. The nurses began reporting sightings, too, of patients they'd just locked inside, walking calmly through other halls, turning corners, even speaking. One nurse followed the copy of a patient down 3 flights of stairs and watched her vanish into a mirror. They called them reflections without glass. Soon, things escalated. The copies began doing things the real patients couldn't, or wouldn't. Whispering secrets no one should know. Touching others and causing nausea, blindness, even sudden bleeding. One orderly went blind for life after the copy of a mute girl kissed him on the cheek. Investigators from the Crown were sent in. None returned. And yet their journals did, delivered by courier 3 days later with no explanation. In them, every entry ended the same way. I am not me anymore. Room 217 was sealed in 1834. Iron bricked, walls salted, holy symbols etched into the stone by a monk who later burned himself alive in the asylum courtyard chanting, The mirror is hungry. Since then, no one has entered 217. But on certain nights, the bricks hum. Cold radiates from it like a tomb. And sometimes, very late, when all the guards are asleep, you can hear two sets of footsteps walking in perfect sync, one where the room used to be, and one outside, pacing as if watching, waiting to be let back in. They buried the files, but not before one survived, a case study labeled only Subject M. Admitted in 1799, he claimed to have built the original Bedlam. That would have been impossible. He was no older than 20. But he described the original floor plan in chilling detail, including areas lost to time and sealed off centuries ago. He drew them with obsessive precision, corridors no longer accessible, rooms removed from record. When questioned, he laughed and said, "You don't build Bedlam, you uncover it." He claimed it had always existed, that the hospital was merely a shell around something older. When they asked what that something was, he replied, "The archivist." He said the building was alive, but not conscious, not yet. The archivist was its seed, a thing that learned by feeding on minds, experiences, pain. Every scream added to its vocabulary, every broken soul a new verse in its ever-growing memory. Over months, Subject M refused to sleep, eat, or blink. When they examined him, his pupils were filled with fractal spirals, tiny rooms within rooms. And then the seizures began, not his, but the building's. Bedlam shook, doors opened and closed by themselves, oil lamps exploded, patients began speaking in his voice. One even coughed up a tooth that matched Subject M's dental records, though they'd never met. The staff tried to move him, but the gurney melted, not burned, melted, as if the asylum itself refused to let him leave. They sealed Subject M in a sub-level vault, one used for old medical supplies. He screamed for 70 hours straight. Then silence. When they reopened the vault, it was empty. Only a mirror remained, and in it, every staff member saw themselves, but older, hollow-eyed, mouths moving just slightly out of sync. No one dared speak of Subject M again. But the plans changed after that. The wards were rebuilt, new geometry introduced, new symbols etched into thresholds, as if the building had grown, and left instructions. They tried to hide what was happening by changing what they called it. Madness became imbalance. Possession became trauma. But language doesn't cleanse what's carved into stone. The truth was always there, in the asylum's foundation. Buried beneath the 13th brick on the east wall of the central rotunda was a coin, not currency, a marker, etched in symbols that predate known alphabets, soaked in blood that never dried. Every physician sworn into Bedlam's service was required to touch it. They thought it was tradition, but it was permission. From that moment on, every doctor became more than a caretaker. They became a conduit. Patients in their care started sharing dreams, identical dreams, of staircases that never ended, of eyes in the floorboards, of infants speaking in adult voices, whispering Latin backwards. The doctors called it the tethering, as if by touching the coin, they had become spiritually leashed to something beneath the hospital, and over time, they changed, first mentally, then physically. One doctor's autopsy showed he'd grown a second heart, black and twisted, nestled in the ribcage like a parasite. Another was found to have hollow bones filled with red dust. None of this made it into public record. The deaths were staged, the causes renamed. One nurse, who documented these changes, tried to burn the coin. She burst into flames before she ever touched it. All that remained were her shoes. From then on, the staff didn't question the rituals, the midnight inventory checks, the unexplained disappearances, the sudden transfers of patients no one remembered admitting. The coin remained embedded in the rotunda until 1901, when it went missing for 72 hours. During that time, everyone inside Bedlam went silent, not mute, silent, not a footstep, not a breath, not a whisper, just stillness, until the coin reappeared on the desk of the head warden, warm, wet, and etched with a new symbol, a tally mark. There were nights when Bedlam disappeared, not metaphorically, literally. Witnesses from nearby boroughs swore that the asylum simply vanished, swallowed by mist thicker than any fog known to London. Gas lamps flickered out. Horses refused to pass the road that led to it. For exactly 3 hours and 33 minutes, Bedlam was gone. And when it reappeared, things were different. The number of windows changed. Ivy grew in new places. One tower stood taller. And most disturbingly, so did the patient count. 12 more than before. But no new admissions, no names, no files. Just bodies in beds, eyes open, unmoving, like wax mannequins that had always been there. The staff was ordered to treat them as normal patients. But every time one was touched, the caregiver reported a jolt, an electric shock to the soul. One nurse said it felt like someone remembering her against her will. These new patients, called the foundlings by staff, never spoke, never blinked. But their presence changed things. Mirrors distorted. Water refused to boil. Timepieces ran counterclockwise. And at night, the other patients screamed, not in terror, but in unison, chanting phrases in dead languages. Linguists brought in to translate the chants were driven insane within days. One wrote a single phrase over and over before clawing out his own eyes. It was never built. It was remembered. The implication was unthinkable, that Bedlam wasn't created in 1247, as recorded, but summoned, recalled from some other place, some darker realm, by people who had forgotten the cost. After the third disappearance, the Crown sealed off the asylum for 1 year. When they returned, 4 of the foundlings were gone. In their place stood identical stone statues, eyeless, faceless, but positioned exactly where the missing patients had lain. Today, no one speaks of the vanishings. But if you visit the ruins, some say you can still hear it, the echo of footsteps in rooms that no longer exist, and voices that never belonged to the living. There was a ledger, kept under lock and key in the chief administrator's office. Not the public patient log, but a second book, thicker, older, bound in cracked hide that smelled faintly of seawater and ash. Its title was unmarked. Inside were not names but symbols. Each entry bore a date, a drawn sigil, and a single phrase like voice given or skin inverted. No 2 entries repeated. But the dates told a story. One that aligned perfectly with lunar cycles, eclipses, and mass disappearances. According to internal memos buried in the archives, these entries corresponded not with patient arrivals, but departures, not deaths, transitions. One former doctor claimed the ledger didn't record what was, but what was taken. The book was indestructible. Fire wouldn't burn it, blades wouldn't pierce it. When an archivist tried to scan its pages, the file corrupted, and his computer screen cracked in the shape of one of the symbols. He later drowned in 2 inches of water, his lungs filled with salt. Those who read too far into the ledger developed side effects, ringing in the ears, sudden migraines, episodes of sleepwalking to places they'd never been. And always, the same phrase murmured in their dreams. The debt is never paid, only inherited. Eventually, the book was hidden deep within the sublevels of Bedlam's archive chamber, behind 6 locks and an iron grate inscribed with protective sigils. But it never stayed there. Every few years, it would be found in a different room, on a bed, in a locked drawer, once in a priest's briefcase, who had never set foot in the asylum. No one could explain how it moved, or why, only that it seemed to want to be read. The last known person to open it died mid-sentence. Heart stopped, eyes wide, tongue bitten off. On the wall behind him were the words. He tried to understand. And underneath, smeared in blood, "Now he belongs to the ledger." The asylum had bells, but not the kind that rang from steeples or summoned staff. These were smaller, stranger, hung upside down in crawl spaces behind mirrors and sealed within walls. Each one was cast in blackened silver, etched with shapes that seemed to move when not observed directly. No rope, no clapper. And yet, they rang, always alone, always when no one else was present. The sound wasn't sharp like a normal bell. It was low, like bone being struck underwater, deep, penetrating. Some said it made their teeth ache. Others claimed it whispered names. But the real terror began when the patients started answering them, not with words, but with movement. Every time a hidden bell rang, one or more patients would leave their beds, walk calmly to the nearest wall, and begin scratching. Not clawing, but writing. Perfect symmetry, ancient lettering, symbols identical to those in the ledger. One patient scratched until her fingers wore to the bone, still writing as her blood soaked the tile. Doctors tried to remove the bells, but couldn't find them. The ones they did recover melted upon contact with daylight. A visiting physicist once claimed the bells weren't instruments, they were receivers, and that something on the other end was sending signals through time, not space. That Bedlam wasn't merely cursed, but in communion. In 1890, the bells all rang at once, every one, from every wall, pipe, mirror, and hollow. It lasted 3 minutes. When it stopped, 17 patients were dead. No wounds, no violence, just emptied, like their souls had been siphoned out. One survivor scrawled on his chest with a shard of porcelain, "The toll has been collected." After that, the staff began wearing earplugs, but it didn't help. Because the bells, they weren't meant to be heard with ears. They were meant to be felt, in marrow, in memory, and in madness. There was a floor in Bedlam that wasn't on any blueprint, referred to in whispers as the hollow. No stairs led to it, no elevator stopped there, and yet staff who wandered too long or took the wrong turn during a night shift sometimes found it. Always by accident, always alone. The hollow didn't obey architecture. Doors led to brick walls, windows opened into blackness, the light bent, refusing to settle. One corridor extended forever unless you closed your eyes. Then you'd arrive at the end instantly, usually breathless, confused, sometimes bleeding from the nose. But the worst part wasn't the space. It was the copies. In the hollow, you saw versions of people you knew, but wrong. A nurse who died weeks earlier, humming a song she never knew. A patient who stared back at you with your own face, but aged 40 years. They never spoke, only watched and followed. The only way out was to stop walking, to lie down and wait, but not sleep, never sleep, because the moment your eyes shut, the hollow changed you. Some staff returned with no memory. Others came back with new scars, new birthmarks, sometimes even different eye colors. One man spoke only in an unknown tongue for the rest of his life. When Bedlam's board learned of the hollow, they did not close it. They installed cameras, but the footage always showed a normal hallway, until it didn't. One tape showed a surgeon wandering the corridor before flickering out. When the static cleared, there were 3 of him, all standing still, all facing the camera, all smiling. The hollow was eventually sealed with concrete and iron, room 0,000, never spoken of, never acknowledged. But sometimes the seal cracks. Lights flicker in the sub-basement. Footsteps echo where no feet walk. And somewhere, in that forgotten space, your double waits, not to replace you, but to remember what you forgot to forget. The garden behind Bedlam was always dead. Gray soil, no roots, no insects. It was called the physician's grave, but not for the dead, for the sacrificed. You see, every decade, one doctor would vanish. No resignation, no farewell. Just gone. The staff knew. It was tradition, unspoken, unbroken. In exchange for 10 more years of control of secrecy, the asylum demanded one of its own. The garden kept count. For every physician that disappeared, a black tree grew, twisted, leafless, bark slick like wet bone. No seeds, no birds. And yet if you placed your hand on the trunk, you'd feel a pulse. Not beating, breathing. One night, a young psychologist refused the ritual. He fled, took a train west, changed his name, swore never to speak of Bedlam again. But it followed, in mirrors, in dreams, in the creak of floorboards behind him. On the 10th night, he carved open his own chest and removed his heart. His last words, "It doesn't want blood, it wants promise." They buried him in a pauper's grave. The next morning, a new tree stood in the garden, taller than the rest, with a single eye-like knot always facing the asylum. Rumor says the trees whisper at night, not wind, but voices, listing names, asking questions. One groundskeeper went deaf after pressing his ear to the bark. He signed what he heard before losing his mind. "Who among you will tend the roots of obedience?" Since then, no one tends the garden. It's fenced off with iron stakes and salt lines. But the trees grow still, one every 10 years. Which means by now, there are more trees than staff. And each one bears the weight of a deal no one remembers signing, but everyone continues to honor. Not all the patients in Bedlam were mad when they arrived. Some were made mad by what they saw, by what they were shown. In 1866, a new therapy wing was added, known as Ward X. Officially, it housed only 5 patients at a time, but records show over 80 souls were committed there in just 1 decade. None were ever discharged. The wing was designed differently, rooms shaped not for healing but for exposure. The architecture followed something called the inversion principle, a method whispered about in fringe Masonic texts. Every room was built to distort perception. Angled corners that made ceilings seem to breathe, mirrored walls that never reflected the person looking. In the center of Ward X was the viewing chair, bolted to the floor, surrounded by a ring of standing mirrors, each cracked, each humming faintly when approached. Patients were strapped in and told to watch what watches. Afterward, none could describe what they saw, only how it made them feel. One wrote, "I saw God's pupil contract." Another screamed until her tongue split. The staff kept notes, dry clinical terms like visual hysteria, reality displacement, and ocular inversion. But the final entries before Ward X was sealed were more honest. One patient evaporated into shadow. One became 2, then none. One is still in the chair, but we no longer see him. The door to Ward X was welded shut in 1875. But some nights, if you walk the 3rd-floor corridor and listen closely, you'll hear the creak of leather restraints and the soft hiss of something breathing in the dark. The viewing chair remains, waiting, not for a patient, but for an audience. There was one room in Bedlam no one was ever meant to enter, not patient, not staff, not priest. Room 104, no door, no key, no handle, just a bricked-off rectangle behind the eastern wing. But despite being sealed, the room spoke. In winter, it grew warm. In summer, it breathed cold. Maintenance logs from as early as 1792 noted voices coming through the wall, not screams, prayers, not in fear, but in worship. They said it sounded like dozens of people whispering the same word over and over in harmony. That word? Return. When renovations were planned in 1908, the room was scheduled for demolition. Workers brought sledgehammers, drills, torches, but nothing opened it. The wall bled. Real blood. Tested and confirmed. Type AB negative. A rare type only found in less than 1% of the population. They called off the demolition. That night, 3 workers vanished. In their place, left in a neat triangle formation, were 3 pairs of shoes, still warm. Rumors spread that room 104 was never built, but formed. A crystallized trauma point where reality folded in on itself. Some said it was the original anchor of Bedlam's curse. Others believed it held something that had agreed to stay asleep, so long as the room stayed closed. But not everyone obeyed. In 1956, a curious psychiatrist bribed a builder to crack a small hole in the brick. What he saw inside drove him to blind himself with a pen. His last words, "It watches with borrowed skin." After that, room 104 was reinforced with steel, then blessed by clergy from 5 different religions. None would enter. One priest died at the threshold. His blood spelled out the word, soon. No one knows what's inside, but once a year, exactly at 3:04 a.m., the wall pulses outward, like it's breathing, and sometimes it knocks back. The strangest file in Bedlam's archive was labeled simply the Ashmouth Protocol. No date, no author, just 74 pages of instructions, handwritten in looping, fevered script. It wasn't medical procedure, it was a ritual, disguised in clinical language, but unmistakable to those who could read between the lines. It described how to silence the voice beneath the asylum. Not metaphorically, the literal voice. A resonance that emerged from beneath the foundation when certain stars aligned overhead. Descriptions of the sound varied. Some heard weeping, some singing, some their own names spoken backwards. The Ashmouth Protocol required 7 participants. Each had to be unknowable to each other. Each had to willingly betray a personal oath. And each had to speak one phrase in perfect unison, while standing barefoot in a pentagram drawn in chalk, ash, and human tooth dust. We consent to be forgotten. Only then, according to the file, would the voice go silent for another generation. But the final page was smeared with something dark, not ink, and scrawled across it in childish handwriting were 4 words. It already remembered you. According to records, the file was discovered in the mouth of a patient who hadn't spoken in 9 years. She died smiling. Since then, every attempt to destroy the Ashmouth Protocol has failed. It reappears, on desks, inside drawers, once folded neatly inside a lunch pail no one claimed. One doctor tried reading it aloud into a recorder. The next morning, his vocal cords had turned black. He never spoke again. Today, the file is stored in a locked vault, under 24-hour surveillance, wrapped in copper wire and placed between 2 mirrors. But guards report hearing pages turning at night. And on the camera feed, sometimes the vault isn't empty. Sometimes there's a woman standing there, smiling, mouthful of ash. Not everything in Bedlam was built by human hands. Beneath the asylum, far deeper than the official blueprints ever admitted, there is a chamber known only to a handful of names in marginalia and rumor. The cradle. It isn't carved from stone, it's grown, ribbed like a lung, pulsating faintly as if slumbering. The air inside is thick, metallic, and unnaturally still. Those who've descended into the cradle report the same sensation the moment they cross its threshold. Their memories begin to slide, not fade, shift. One archivist emerged unable to recall his own name, but could recite, word for word, an extinct Sumerian hymn that predated Bedlam by 4,000 years. The walls of the cradle hum when touched. Not music, not machinery. Something older, language before language. In the center sits a basin, not for water, but for offerings. It's shallow, filled with a dark, mercury-like fluid that reflects not your face, but your deepest lie. Stare long enough, and it changes you. That's what happened to Dr. Wallace in 1932. He entered the cradle with a crucifix and a pistol. He came back smiling, teeth missing, and claimed, "It's not hell. It's the womb of what judges hell." His journals, written afterward in reverse Latin, describe something called the inheritance of echoes, a concept that suggests all thought, all madness, all prayer, bleeds into the cradle. It feeds on belief, sustains itself by being witnessed. That's why no map ever shows it. It doesn't need to be found. It finds you, a whisper in your spine, a weight behind your heartbeat, and when you finally descend, it already knows your name, because it was there when you were born. There's a photograph hidden deep in the restricted archives of Bedlam, dated 1903, its surface faded and scorched around the edges. It shows a group of 12 people dressed in formal asylum staff uniforms, but none of them are listed in any employment records. The caption reads simply, "The Original Committee." What makes the image disturbing isn't their eyes, or lack of reflection in the glass plate, or even the inverted crucifix embroidered into their collars. It's the figure behind them, towering, indistinct, blurred as if moving while the rest stood still. Yet the photo required a full 45-second exposure, meaning whatever stood behind them was not bound by time in the same way. Analysts attempted to enhance the image decades later and discovered a second figure, mirrored and upside down beneath the floorboards, as though beneath the world. The committee was not medical. They were curators of continuity. Their job was not to heal patients, but to ensure the asylum's purpose remained undisturbed. What purpose? To maintain containment. Documents recovered from a destroyed wing suggest the committee didn't work for Bedlam. Bedlam was built for them, a facility designed not to treat insanity, but to harvest it, to concentrate psychic suffering into a form they called resonant density. Every scream, every forgotten name, every broken mind was not tragedy. It was tribute. Tribute to the entity in the photo's background. In the margins of one ledger, scrawled in symbols matching no known language, a phrase repeats again and again, as if from a voice losing cohesion. "You built a house on the edge of the dream. Now the dream wants in." The photo remains locked in a triple-sealed vault. But even then, it moves. Every few years, the figures change position. New ones appear. Some resemble modern staff. Some, you. In 1921, an unnamed patient, file redacted, photograph removed, was admitted to Bedlam under circumstances marked exigent for internal containment. He did not speak. He did not sleep. He simply stared, not at others but through them. Those who met his gaze reported vivid hallucinations, visions of cities made of teeth, skies weeping clocks, and oceans whispering in extinct languages. One orderly went blind after only 2 minutes in the same room. Another gouged out her own eyes to unsee the horizon he brought with him. This patient's cell was sealed behind 7 doors, each with a unique key, all held by different departments. Despite this, he vanished one night. Not escaped. Vanished. No forced locks. No broken glass. Just an empty bed, and on it, a single phrase burned into the sheets. He sees more when unseen. Afterward, strange phenomena erupted throughout the asylum. Patients who had never met began drawing identical spiral symbols on the walls, on their skin, even under their eyelids. One patient, mute since birth, began speaking in a voice not his own, repeating over and over, "The eye is open beneath the floor. You are all reflections. You are all dreams dreamed by it." The spiral became known as the Sigil of forgetting. Those who saw it once could never remember seeing it again, but were irrevocably changed. Staff complained of hearing static when no machines were present. Clocks reversed. Door handles melted in their grip, and always, in the corner of their vision, a pale shape just out of reach, watching, waiting. A memo dated 3 weeks after the patient's disappearance stated, "The asylum is no longer containing him. It is becoming him." That wing of Bedlam was collapsed and buried in concrete. But the spiral has returned. In dreams, in graffiti, in children's drawings submitted from schools nowhere near London. And the phrase found beside every new spiral is always the same. The eye remembers, who forgets? They thought asylum bells only rang during fires, escapes, or death. But once a decade, at precisely 3:13 a.m., Bedlam's tower rang 13 times, with no human hand touching it. No wind, no mechanism engaged. The clang was not mechanical. It was organic, like bone striking bone, echoing through the marrow of every man inside. Staff called it the 13th toll. Patients would wake screaming before the first chime finished, clawing at the walls, some even gouging their own ears out to silence it. In 1893, during one such event, an attendant recorded the sound using an experimental wax cylinder. When played back, the audio did not replicate the bell, but voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, whispering in unison, not in terror, but worship. The voices repeated the same chilling line, "You dream in its absence, you live in its waiting." After that, the wax melted in its case, though the room remained cold. No explanation, no replication. Researchers who reviewed the transcript later suffered auditory hallucinations. One slit his throat, claiming he could still hear the bell ringing inside his ribs. Some began to believe Bedlam itself was not just haunted, but timed. That every 13 years it aligned. With what? Theories varied. Some said lunar convergence. Others said an entity beneath the earth attempting to breach. But the consensus was clear. The bell was a countdown, not a warning, a signal. After the 1952 toll, half the asylum's clocks stopped, permanently, not broken, frozen, all at 3:13. Electrical systems failed, animals fled the grounds, and a rift in the floor of Ward 9 was discovered, shaped like a human mouth, with teeth made of shattered porcelain. The toll is due again, this year, and deep in the tower's stone foundation, written in soot and fingernail scratches, is a phrase carved by unknown hands. When the bell rings 13, Bedlam walks. There was a doctor once, Dr. Alton Greaves, who didn't believe in the asylum's curse. A rationalist, a skeptic, a surgeon who scoffed at talk of rituals and shadows. In 1939, he requested permission to study the infectious nature of delusion by isolating patients who claimed to see the man in the mirrors. He was granted access to a disused lower wing. Over the course of 92 days, he conducted interviews, tests, and eventually unethical experiments. Greaves believed madness could be transmitted like a disease. He recorded patients who screamed in unknown tongues, then played the audio to stable subjects to see what took root. It worked. Within weeks, the new patients began drawing the same man, tall, skeletal, wrapped in rust-colored bandages, always reflected, but never seen directly. One night, Dr. Greaves turned on his own recorder and asked the mirror, "If you are real, show me something I won't survive." The next day, he was found folded, literally, into a wardrobe. Spine bent in 7 unnatural places. His mouth was sewn shut from the inside. No fingerprints, just a mirror, still fogged with breath, and the words, "Request accepted," scrawled backwards across the glass. The remaining patients were moved, the wing sealed. But that mirror? It remains, covered now, chained behind iron shutters. Staff who walk past report a tapping, 3 knocks, then silence. And when the cover slips, even slightly, the glass shows not their reflection, but a version of the room where they don't exist, a world untouched by their presence, a world waiting to replace them. The last note in Dr. Greaves's file reads, "Delusion is not the disease, it's the door." In 1877, Bedlam's board authorized a secret project under the codename Anamnesis. It was not a treatment, but an erasure, a process designed to surgically remove traumatic memories and liberate the soul from the burden of recollection. The architect of this atrocity was Dr. Horace Brielle, a man obsessed with purity of thought. He believed pain was a parasite, and memory its carrier. Using crude trepanation tools and ether, Brielle began with small operations. A single thought here, a nightmare there. But patients returned, empty, not peaceful, not free, hollow. They would sit motionless for days, unaware of their own names, staring into corners as if something had filled the void their memories left behind. One nurse wrote, "They remember nothing, but something remembers them." The turning point came when Brielle attempted a full erasure on a patient named Miriam Thatch, a mother institutionalized for postpartum hallucinations. When she awoke, she screamed not in fear, but recognition. "I see the ones before me," she howled. "They wear my face." Then she died, and her body, left untouched in the morgue, breathed for 11 more minutes. The coroner resigned. Within a week, 4 more erasure subjects had committed suicide using identical methods, fashioning nooses from sheets, each one writing the same message in blood. Memory is a cage, but something was in there with me. Project Anamnesis was shut down, all files sealed. Brielle vanished. Officially, he died in 1882. Unofficially, a nurse claimed she saw him, decades later, wandering the East Corridor, eyes glowing faintly, whispering names that hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Some believe he didn't erase memory. He merely shifted it into a shared space beneath the conscious mind, and whatever lives there now is building a self. One memory at a time. In the lowest levels of Bedlam, far below even the forgotten wards, there exists a door with no records, no hinges, and no key. It is known only as the door that dreams. Unlike the rest of the asylum's rotting corridors, this one wall remains pristine. The stone is smooth, white, almost luminous, as if untouched by time or decay. The door itself appears to ripple faintly, like skin responding to breath. No one recalls who discovered it. Some say it was always there, even before the asylum was built. The earliest mention is in a 1784 journal entry by a patient named Leland Oro. "I heard the door breathing again. It dreams of the ones who knock without knowing." Over the centuries, many have tried to open it. Most never return. Those who do come back, changed. They speak in patterns, languages that don't belong to this earth. One returned with his eyes on backward. Another wrote symbols into his own skin until there was no flesh left untouched. But the most terrifying account came from a nurse named Eliza Horn. She disappeared in 1901, returned 3 days later, pregnant. Her child was born without a face, just smooth flesh where the features should be. It never cried, it never moved, it only stared somehow, without eyes. The child lived 3 hours, then it whispered one sentence to Eliza before dying. "You knocked, now something knocks back." Eliza never spoke again. The door remains closed, but not still. On certain nights it bulges outward, as if pressing to be born. A pulse felt in the walls, lights flicker, ink bleeds on its own. And always, always, a dream follows, shared by every soul within the asylum that night. A corridor with no end, a voice behind them calling their true name, and at the far end, the door, always the door, and something on the other side smiling. There is a recording, banned, buried, and whispered about by the few who survived hearing it, known only as the session that broke time. Dated October 13, 1957, it was an audio log of a routine patient evaluation conducted in Ward D6. The doctor was a young psychiatrist, Dr. Francis Vale. The patient, name withheld, had no memory, no documents, and no prior diagnosis. She spoke only when asked one question: "Do you know where you are?" Her reply was a sound, not language, not music, a tone, beneath human pitch, but the recording equipment caught it. And when played back, time, fractured. Everyone who listened to the full tape experienced phenomena: clocks melting, voices reversing, their own reflections moving independently. One nurse began aging rapidly in front of staff. Another regressed, screaming in infantile gibberish until she went silent, permanently. The most horrifying account came from Dr. Vale's assistant, who described seeing shadows move backwards, re-entering doors they had just exited, while hearing his own heartbeat play like a broken music box in the ceiling. The tape was sealed in a vault, labeled, "Do not play under any circumstance." But curiosity, as always, crept in. In 1986, an intern found it, played it, and for 4 days, Bedlam ceased to obey chronology. Night and day looped. Patients who had died decades earlier were seen walking the halls. A wing that had burned down in 1922 appeared fully intact, then vanished again. The tape was destroyed finally, but remnants, echoes, persist. Sometimes, the sound returns through the Asylum speaker system, despite them being long disconnected. A low, droning hum that bends light, fogs memory, and causes static to rise beneath the skin. And always, always, that phrase repeated softly on loop in the background. This is not the first time you've heard this. You just forgot what happened next. One file, buried deeper than most, was sealed with wax and stitched in human hair. Its title, "The One Who Ate Names." It tells of a patient committed in 1898, brought in without documents, speaking dozens of languages, but none that matched his apparent origin. He refused food, water, even air, yet his body did not decay. His cellmate died within 3 days, his name forgotten by everyone, including his own family. Staff began referring to the new patient as the Hollow Man, because whenever someone entered his presence, they forgot something: a date, a location, a loved one's face. But the Hollow Man remembered everything they lost. On the 3rd week, he spoke to a nurse, whispering her mother's name, dead 20 years, and the exact words her mother had said on her deathbed. The nurse collapsed, sobbing. The next morning she slit her own throat, the word "remember" carved into her chest. Over time, entire case files went blank. Birth records, marriage licenses, whole wings of Bedlam faded from collective memory. It was as if this patient devoured identity itself. But here's the horror: he didn't erase them. He stored them. In one journal, Dr. Levington noted, "He carries our names, all of them, like a library with no exits." On the day of the 1903 fire in East Wing, the Hollow Man walked out of his cell, untouched by flame, and disappeared into the smoke. He was never found, yet reports of him continued across Europe. A man with no face, only smooth skin where features should be. A man who knows your middle name before you say it, who offers to return memories for a cost. Witnesses who've seen him describe the same sensation afterward, looking in the mirror and feeling like a stranger is staring back. And deep in Bedlam's archives, in a sealed glass box, lies a note in flawless script. When you forget who you are, I eat. When you remember, I wake. There's a corridor in Bedlam that isn't on any blueprint, yet staff report accidentally entering it, only to find themselves lost for hours. They call it the Hall of Mouths. The walls are covered not with paint or tile, but flesh. Puckered, distorted, constantly shifting skin, embedded with mouths. Hundreds of them. Some stitched shut, others murmuring. A few scream, but only when no one is looking. One attendant, trapped inside for 11 hours, emerged catatonic, his ears sealed by scar tissue grown overnight. When they managed to restore partial hearing, he begged to go deaf again. His exact words, "They speak in hungers, not words," and they were learning my name from each scream I held in. No one knows who built it. No one knows why it appears only during electrical failures, but what is known is this. Every mouth speaks inward. Nothing is projected out. Microphones left in the hallway pick up nothing, but stethoscopes pressed to the mouths, they breathe, and worse, they listen. In 1925, a child patient vanished from a locked room, found days later in the hall, curled in the fetal position. Her spine was gone, replaced by a cord of braided tongues. When asked what happened, she wept and said, "I told them my story, and now it's not mine anymore." The hall appears to consume not flesh, but confession, secrets, regret, guilt. Whatever is shared within it doesn't stay contained. It becomes part of the structure. You can still see lines of poetry etched into the gums, screamed apologies fossilized in molars, and one phrase, carved deeply into a lip with human fingernails, loops endlessly across the corridor's length. Speak nothing, or it will learn how to wear your voice. They called it the room that watches back. Officially, it was cell 42B, just another observation room sealed after the 1911 patient revolt. But those who worked the night shift knew to avoid it, not because of what was inside, but because of what wasn't. It was empty, always empty. And yet the room was never still. The camera trained on the cell, one of the earliest installed in Bedlam, would distort, not with static but motion blur, as if something was pacing, though no body registered. One janitor, assigned to clean the room, described a suffocating pressure. He said the ceiling felt too low, though it measured normal. The floor too soft, though it was tile. The air too loud, filled with breathing that didn't match his own. He lasted 13 minutes. The footage showed him entering the room, and then standing, frozen, eyes wide, mouth open. But he did not blink. For 13 full minutes, he stood perfectly still, staring into the corner. When staff pulled him out, he wept like a child. Screamed, "It knows I know it's there." He never spoke again. Over the next year, 6 more staff members entered 42B. 5 resigned within a week. 1, Dr. Helena Rusk, stayed longer. She believed the room housed a presence without form, an idea so dense it achieved gravity. Her notes speculate the room isn't haunted by a ghost, but by attention itself. It observes anyone who observes it. The more you notice it, the more real it becomes. The more real it becomes, the less room there is for you. She was found in her office, eyes sewn shut, fingers snapped backward, as if praying into herself. No signs of forced entry, just a note on her desk. The room has remembered its name. The cell remains sealed, but late at night, guards report a red light blinking above the door. And every so often, if you press your ear to the wall, you'll hear it, your own voice, asking to be let in. Buried in the western foundations of Bedlam, beneath the abandoned chapel, lies a vault sealed in 1804, known only as the Mother's Mouth. No blueprints mark its existence, yet every architect since has reported dreams of it. Dreams soaked in the sound of wet breathing and a voice like soil swallowing blood. The vault was first discovered during an expansion. Workers broke through ancient stone and found a spiral staircase descending into warm fog. At the bottom, a cavern pulsing with heat. Not fire, not light. Something alive. The floor was made of teeth, hundreds, maybe thousands, embedded in black flesh that rippled when stepped on. At the center was a pit, from which moaning emerged. Not pain, not pleasure. Something older. One worker approached. He looked down, and was gone. No scream, no fall, just gone. The rest fled. Within days, their mouths began to rot. Gums peeled back, tongues blackened. One man tore out his own jaw with a hammer. Before he died, he wrote, "She does not forget her children. We were not meant to speak her name." Investigators sealed the chamber with consecrated concrete, 5 feet thick. A priest was buried in the wall, alive, his prayers the final seal. But silence did not hold. By 1872, patients began muttering the same phrase in sleep: "Feed the mother, fill the pit." No one had told them about the vault. One even carved a spiral into his chest and walked straight into the fireplace, never burning, only disappearing. Over the years, those assigned to guard that wing reported hearing crying, not from pain, but birth, as if something below was constantly delivering and devouring. The last record, from 1938, simply reads, "It's no longer sleeping, the tooth floor grows." That section of the asylum collapsed months later, officially structural instability. But the photos, never released, show something else. A new corridor formed, a spiral of bone, and at the end, a door with no handle, only a mouth, smiling. There was one final patient file marked with red wax and the words, "Do not recall." Her name was Sister Agnes Meyer, an ex-nun committed in 1921 after being found walking barefoot through the streets of London, eyes sewn shut, murmuring scripture backward. Her intake interview was lost, but what remains are staff notes, rattled, inconsistent, many of them in different handwriting, though attributed to the same person. She never spoke in daylight. But at night, her cell glowed faintly from within, casting shadows that moved opposite the walls. One nurse attempted to speak with her alone. She returned bleeding from her ears and nose, whispering, "She doesn't believe in God anymore, and now he doesn't believe in us." Sister Meyer had no known family, yet she received letters, unmarked, written in ash on linen, sealed with something that reeked of iron and flowers. All contained the same phrase, "Remember what you are before he remembers you." Her drawings were worse. Thousands of pages filled with one recurring shape, a staircase spiraling into a mouth, with the eyes of saints inside its throat. After her 3rd year, she stopped sleeping, not from mania, but from something deeper. As one orderly wrote, "She says sleep is where he hunts, that dreams are how he reads us." One night during a thunderstorm, every mirror in the asylum cracked, simultaneously, and in every shard, patients claimed they saw Sister Meyer standing behind them, though she was locked in her cell. When staff broke in, she was gone, not missing, absent. The walls of her room pulsed with a heartbeat. Her bed had decayed into rotting lilies, and on the ceiling, scrawled in blood, a message. "You remembered me. Now, he remembers you." No trace of her was ever found. But sometimes during communion at nearby churches, the wine turns black in the chalice, and a voice, gentle, female, devout, whispers from the altar, "He's almost done dreaming, and you're next." The final passage in Bedlam's darkest archive is written not in ink, but in fingernail scratches across the walls of a sealed sub-basement chamber. The entry is untitled, unsigned, but those who've read it call it the first arrival. It speaks of a man admitted before the asylum was even completed, before the roof was finished, before there were doors to lock. They brought him in chains forged from melted crucifixes, 7 priests walking backward, chanting verses that never appeared in Scripture. His name is lost, scratched out in every copy of the admission log, but the title remains, Bearer of the Reverse Mark. Staff described him as both skeletal and bloated, simultaneously starved and fed. His shadow bent the wrong way, toward light, not away from it, and he never blinked, not once. He would only whisper, "I came first. I come always. I am what's left when you forget to die." He was placed in a chamber with no windows, no sound, no metal, only salt and ash. Yet the walls cracked within 3 days. Rats would not go near the door, nor would birds nest above it. One guard assigned to that hallway removed his own tongue and inserted shards of glass, screaming, "He's speaking to me in a language made of bone." Over time, the asylum began to reflect the first arrival, rooms where time folded, stairwells that returned you to where you began, hallways that got longer the more you prayed. Bedlam didn't just house the mad, it became mad. He became its architect. One physician, obsessed with the creature's origin, traced his signs to ancient Mesopotamian burial caves where priests would blind themselves before carving a mouth into stone. These sites were known as thresholds, portals to something older than gods, something that speaks only when forgotten. The doctor was found in 1919 inside the first arrival's chamber, arms broken backward, head twisted completely around, smiling. No sign of forced entry, but etched into his chest were the words, "He's still arriving." The cell is sealed with 13 iron doors, never opened. Yet every year, on the anniversary of his arrival, that hallway runs warm, walls sweat, and if you stand there long enough, you'll forget how to leave. And yet, the deepest horror isn't in what Bedlam held, it's in what Bedlam released. After its final closure in 1985, demolition crews were brought in to dismantle the oldest wings. What they found should have stopped the project, but records show it was accelerated. Beneath the foundation, they uncovered a buried ossuary sealed with obsidian bolts. Inside, bones arranged in spirals, not by species, but by function. Rows of kneecaps, towers of jawbones, a chandelier made from infant ribs, and in the center, resting on a slab of fossilized tongues, was a book. Bound in scalp, inked in spinal marrow. Its cover bore no title, only a symbol, a circle devouring its own eye. The demolition halted, but only briefly. Within 72 hours, 6 workers were dead. 2 vanished entirely, and one, the site foreman, reportedly walked into a nearby cathedral and plucked out both of his eyes during Mass. His last words, "They've given it a name again." That same week, a sealed letter arrived at the British Museum. No return address. Inside were photographs of the book, open to a page showing a diagram of Bedlam itself, built to mirror a ritual glyph known as the dream that consumes. Not a hospital, a sigil, an antenna for despair. The book and the bones were quietly removed. The vault was filled with concrete, the demolition completed. But from that year on, across psychiatric wards worldwide, staff reported patients whispering the same phrase in dead languages, "He's walking again." London's fog grew thicker. Cases of untraceable possession rose, and in certain homes, children were born with a mark beneath their tongues, a spiral of teeth. The government's official stance remains silence. But the truth is this: Bedlam was never shut down. Its walls were scattered, not destroyed, its rituals embedded in blueprints, hospitals, schools. It no longer needs a location, it only needs memory. And you speak its name aloud when you try to understand it, you become one of its rooms. Do you feel it? That weight behind your eyes? That itch you can't scratch inside your skull? You've opened the door, and now you are the corridor. This is where the story was supposed to end. Rubble and ruin, files sealed, horrors buried. But madness doesn't vanish when ignored. It migrates. And Bedlam, it's been whispering through cracks in your world ever since. You've seen it, haven't you? In the hallway that shouldn't be there, in the stranger on the bus who mouthed your name but never moved their lips, in the dream you've had since childhood, the one with no sky, only stairs, and a door you never open. That's not imagination, that's resonance. Because now, you carry it. This story isn't just a warning, it's a key. Every spiral you've seen since watching, every face that looked a little too familiar in the crowd, they're signals. Bedlam is not behind you. It's within. What you've heard, What you've allowed in, it doesn't go away. Knowledge has a cost, and tonight, your debt is due. But there is still one way out. One final act that may save you. Not from them, but from becoming them. You must bury the name. Forget the path. Leave the door closed. But if you can't, if your curiosity wins, go to the mirror after midnight, bring no light, and whisper, I remember the ward that remembers me, twice, once for who you were, once for what you'll become. If nothing happens, you're safe for now. But if the mirror smiles back, run. You have less time than you think. This story is not over, because you're part of it now. Every man who learns the truth becomes a threshold, and every threshold opens somewhere deeper, somewhere darker, somewhere that sounds a lot like your own voice, whispering in a room that should be empty. That's not your echo. It's your replacement.